America has gone to the polls to elect its 47th president, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. Let's cross now to the US and 7 News US correspondent Tim Lester, who is at the Palm Beach Convention Centre where Donald Trump might make an appearance. He might even make his acceptance speech. Tim, can you describe what you're seeing at the moment?
Well, a large, very large complex, the convention centre, where we know that Republicans have been filing in, perhaps not yet in the numbers that they ultimately might. There's a big police presence around here, a giant media presence. Interesting, so many of the media outside in occasional showers of rain tells you a bit about Donald Trump, the candidate, and his friction with the media. Media favourites are allowed in. All of the rest are outside and won't get in. Looking on, and particularly, though, waiting on one issue, and that is whether Donald Trump comes here tonight. And we understand he's in contrary perhaps to the situation he got in as president in the White House 4 years ago. We're told he's making a quite deliberative choice this time not to come in until, at least as he sees it, there's real clarity. Now, when that is, who knows? There are some interesting indicators out there at the moment, not least the New York Times that's running a kind of chances needle that leans Trump's way a bit at the moment, suggests that he would, that the most likely outcome is a narrow Trump victory, though this is a forecast, it's not this is a guess in essence, based on early voting. It's hardly firm yet. But so Donald Trump, will he turn up? We don't know. It may well be that we get to the end of the night and it's still too difficult to call, and we've got to wait on our hands. Certainly it looks close, but there are plenty of Trump supporters around here that will be delighted if we get to the stage where he feels he can make the trip.
Yeah, well, earlier today you were at Mar-a-Lago, one of the most infamous political locations in recent American political history. Of course, the White House away from home for Donald Trump in Florida. What have we heard from the former president today as votes have started to trickle in?
Well, he's been fairly measured. He's had a couple of messages on social media where, interestingly, he's encouraging Republican supporters, his supporters, to do what Americans can do in their electoral system in many states, and that is remain in line. Once you get in line, if the polls pass their closing time, you're still allowed to vote, provided you're in line. So one of the things in a close election that Trump and Harris want to do is encourage those voters not to go, it's too late, I want to go home for dinner, but stay put. The vote might really matter. So doing a bit of that encouraging and being fairly moderate in the way he speaks about the issue of cheating, quite a contrast to his final rallies, because, of course, as the campaign neared an end, his rallies became fairly dark, fairly negative. In fact, some would say aggressively negative, and a lot of talk about cheating. Allegations of cheating he put right out there very clearly, consistently over the last few weeks. Now, not so much today. I guess the cynic would say he's not making them because he wants to see where the real vote lands before he decides whether he'll make the allegation.
Yeah, and especially with that needle on the New York Times that you mentioned leaning in his direction, all of a sudden the allegations of cheating seem to have dried up. What about Kamala's camp? What have we heard from them today?
Well, again, they've been fairly reserved, I think. I haven't had the close-up look at the way they've been doing this. I think at the moment, though, they're looking on numbers that the best spin they can put on it would be to say that there's a lot of counting left and a lot of possibility for the Democrats to pick up votes. Certainly, the Democrats do well in the West. California, the biggest of the states, has the most number of electoral votes, so is a kind of whale in the Electoral College, and that's not in the numbers yet, nor Washington and Oregon that we expect will fall in the Democrat column. So they'll top up a lot of votes yet in the college. But the 7 swing states are where the interest is. And the early indications, everybody was looking particularly to the southeastern states because Georgia and North Carolina, that are certainly swing states, could go either way. They were looking there for indications that Kamala Harris might be doing a bit better than historically in those states than the Democrats have done, and that would tell them that things could be good elsewhere. Really, those counts aren't showing that at the moment. Donald Trump, at last look, had a lead in both. It's pretty narrow. Neither, I think, has been firmly called by any of the major networks, but it's not great for the Democrats. So that falls us back to for the Democrats for those 3 northeastern states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and they too are tight, although Harris there has small leads.
Yeah, it's so tight in some of those races that, you know, it won't be long before we start drilling down into individual counties and where some of those ballots might be landing. It's going to be fascinating to watch as this all unfolds. What are people on the ground telling you? What's the general public saying? Because exit polls show a majority of people are worried about the prospect of violence. Are you hearing that from people that you've spoken to?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real worry about that. And there's, I think, pretty good reason to worry in a society where both sides look at the other and say, well, we won't be the violent side. The violence will come from the other side. But everybody has a certain level of concern about the possibility. So, yes, I think there is a concern. One of the real worries is the situation where Trump has what is, if you like, at least an appearance of a little bit of impetus here over Kamala Harris. If we see that ebb away, and we saw this in 2020, at least initially in the count at this time, Donald Trump looked pretty good, but it turned late in the night, and the act of that turning, even although you can explain it when you talk about categories of votes being counted at particular times, and you know, back then it was the mail-in vote that favoured the Democrats and in certain key situations was counted late. If we see that kind of ebb away to Kamala Harris, you can again see many of the most passionate Trump supporters going, hang on, at 9 and 10 o'clock we were celebrating a likely win. It looked really good. And at 1 and 2 a.m. all of a sudden we're told things are bad. That's when you get this sense of suspicion and the potential for tempers to flare and problems. So there is that potential at the moment. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, like it's not hard to see it could follow a similar pattern to 2020, and it's just as simple as about time difference. You know, the west coast of America, the polls close later, the count starts later, so those results come later. But can you tell us, Tim, what the next few hours will look like for you as you follow this election?
Well, they'll be late, but they'll be very, very interesting. Just seeing the vote count build in these critical parts of the country, and what trends emerge, whether what we've seen holds pretty well for Donald Trump. Certainly by a narrow margin, the predictive computer that the New York Times is applying to the equation suggests he'll probably squeak through. So watching that is going to be fascinating. And then there are the other decisions. How does Trump respond and when does he respond is a really big question for the world, frankly, because if he sees the election going against him and chooses to call cheat, then a whole question of stability of the world's biggest democracy comes in, it's not actually. India is a democracy, but the world's most wealthy and powerful democracy comes into play, and a critical ally of Australia, and that leads to an uncertain time. So that's a really important long-term question that we'll start to get some shape on probably in the next few hours.
Yeah, in terms of the potential impacts on the rest of the world, this presidential race is one of the most pivotal of recent memory, and the whole world will be watching. US Correspondent Tim Lester from 7 News. We really appreciate all of your first-hand accounts on the Nightly Five, and you stay safe over the next few hours ahead.
Lovely chatting, and hope we get to do it again soon. There'll be plenty to talk about.
They sure will, Tim. Thanks.